He left me while I was fighting cancer. So I quietly took back everything he thought he got away with. And by the time he figured it out, he couldn't even afford a bandage. You won't want to miss this story. But before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. I used to think pain had a shape like a needle, or a bruise, or something you could point to and say, there, that's where it hurts. But then I got cancer. And I learned that pain can also walk on two legs, kiss your forehead, and vanish with your bank account while you're still sitting in a hospital gown with a port in your chest. The day I was diagnosed with stage 2 lymphoma, I reached for Grant's hand. He held it, sure, but something was already retreating behind his eyes. He nodded through the appointments, the paperwork, the treatment plan, the part where they told me I might lose my hair, my appetite, maybe even my fertility, but he stopped touching me like I was someone who had a future. At first, I told myself he was scared, just overwhelmed. That the long nights on the couch, the short answers, the forced smiles were him coping badly. But then, 2 weeks into chemo, I came back from the bathroom and found his key on the counter and a note folded like it was nothing more than a restaurant receipt. I'm sorry, it started. I can't do this, it ended. I stood there sweating, weak, my mouth dry from the treatment, wondering if this was a hallucination. I called, blocked, texted, ignored. I opened our joint account, emptied. I sat down on the bed, surrounded by the echo of a life that had just collapsed like a house without support beams, and I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body didn't even have the strength to mourn properly. So I packed a bag, called my sister, and moved into her spare room with nothing but a toothbrush, and the realization that the person I trusted most would rather disappear than stay and watch me fight for my life. Nights were the worst. Between waves of nausea and handfuls of hair in the sink, I'd scroll through old photos of us, him cooking, him laughing, him kissing my cheek, and I'd try to understand how love could turn into absence so easily. I wrote everything down, not to make sense of it, but to remember, to never forget how it felt to be discarded like I was inconvenient. And somewhere in those pages, between the doctor's notes and my own, a promise started to form. He would feel this, not through rage, not through chaos, but through consequence. One day, I'd be stronger, and when I was, I'd hit him where he never thought I could. By the time my third chemo cycle rolled around, Grant was already a ghost in everything but body. He still occupied the apartment, technically left his socks on the floor, his toothbrush beside mine, but the warmth was gone. He'd moved emotionally, silently, with the kind of cowardice that doesn't slam doors but leaves drawers half open. He stopped asking how I was feeling, stopped offering to drive me, stopped looking me in the eyes when I vomited into the bathroom sink. There were days I couldn't even lift a spoon, and I'd still find myself alone on the couch, head spinning, as he texted from the other room about being busy. I should have seen it coming. When I said I couldn't make it up the stairs without help, he sighed. When I cried about losing patches of my hair, he looked at his phone. When the insurance statement came in the mail, he muttered something about how expensive this would be if it drags on. That should have been the moment. But I was still clinging to this broken version of us, like it could be stitched back together with enough time or softness or patience. I was wrong. So wrong. I woke up on a Tuesday morning to the smell of toast and a cup of water by the bed, just enough kindness to lull me into a lie. He wasn't there. His shoes were gone. His work bag, too. I shuffled into the kitchen and found a folded piece of paper on the counter, weighted down by the mug I'd made him in a pottery class 2 years earlier. I'm sorry, Em, I can't do this. You'll be better off without me. Just like that. I dropped the note, opened our banking app, and saw the zeros where support should have been. Our savings account, gone. My name on the lease meant nothing when my body was too weak to stand, let alone fight. I called my sister, voice trembling, and she told me to pack a bag whatever I could manage. When she pulled up, she didn't ask questions. She just opened the passenger door and helped me in like I was made of glass. That night, in her spare room that smelled faintly of lavender and safety, I finally cried. Not because I missed him, but because I saw myself so clearly for the first time in weeks. He hadn't left me because I was sick. He left me because my sickness made it impossible to pretend anymore. I was no longer easy, no longer convenient, and for that, he ran. But I wasn't going to stay small or broken. I just needed time, and I would make sure he paid for every second he stole from me. Silence became its own kind of chemotherapy, slow and corrosive, but not for the body, for the soul. After Grant vanished, the world didn't pause to let me catch my breath. Bills still arrived in unforgiving envelopes with words like urgent and past due, my name coldly printed on them like I was just another number. The hospital called twice when my insurance lapsed for 2 weeks thanks to paperwork Grant had promised to handle before leaving, and I learned firsthand how expensive survival could be. My sister did her best, always coming home with groceries and soft blankets, but I knew I was a burden she never asked for. Every gesture of kindness felt like a mirror held to my brokenness. Friends grew quiet, as if cancer was contagious through text. One even sent a thinking of you message, and then never replied again. I stopped counting the people who told me to stay strong, like I hadn't already emptied myself just trying to stand upright. Grant had blocked me everywhere, phone, email, even Venmo, as if I was going to send him $1 with a note that said, "For the emotional devastation." I laughed once at that thought, then cried for 20 minutes straight. I was tired of crying. Tired of watching my reflection shrink, watching my hair fall out in sad clumps onto my pillow, tired of feeling like the ghost in someone else's story. So I started therapy. At first, I hated it. Hated the quiet nods from a stranger. Hated the way she asked me to sit with the discomfort, when all I wanted was to scream. But eventually, the dam broke. I started writing everything down. The appointments he missed, the things he said under his breath, the way he once told me I was being dramatic when I asked him to stay in the chemo ward. I wrote until my wrist ached and the pages curled with ink. My therapist said journaling could help me find clarity, but I wasn't looking for clarity. I was building a timeline, a record, proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the neglect, the abandonment, the slow erosion of my dignity at the hands of someone who once promised forever. Each entry became a piece of armor, each memory a receipt. And even though the silence between us stretched like an ocean, even though he pretended I no longer existed, I was still here scarred, yes, but sharpening. He thought he'd erased me, but I was rewriting myself, word by word, therapy session by therapy session. And when the time came, I wouldn't just speak, I would testify. The day they told me I was in remission, my body felt lighter, but not my chest. That part stayed heavy, full of things unspoken, undone, and unforgiven. Everyone expected tears of relief, a smile maybe, or one of those poetic moments where you look out a window and the sunlight feels like hope, but all I felt was raw clarity. Like the poison that had been flushed from my body had settled in my bloodstream as purpose. I didn't want Grant back. That part surprised me. I thought I'd want closure, maybe even an apology. But the truth was, I wouldn't believe a single syllable that came from his lips if he tried. What I wanted, what I ached for, was balance. To make him feel a fraction of the fear, the helplessness, the shame I swallowed every day he left me to rot in that hospital bed alone. Rage isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up in clean dishes, in therapy homework completed with precision, in the email drafts you never send. I started walking again first, with trembling knees and a racing heart, but eventually with purpose. I passed our old coffee shop once and didn't flinch. Instead, I pictured him there with someone new, saying the same charming lies, ordering the same oat milk latte, acting like he hadn't left someone bald and broken while he moved on with his life. That image didn't make me sad anymore. It made me sharp. Recovery gave me my body back, but rage gave me my voice. I started reading legal blogs late into the night, Googling words like abandonment and emotional damages. I asked my therapist if documenting his absence, his neglect, could help in a civil case. She blinked once, then nodded slowly, like someone watching a storm form behind glass. My journal was now thick, heavy in my hands. Dates, screenshots, medical records, even the receipts for the insurance policy I had to restart alone after he let the premiums lapse. It was all there. I wasn't just healing, I was preparing. Grant may have walked away mid-chemo, but I had survived that, and now I was stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than the girl who once begged him to stay. People always talk about post-cancer clarity like it's this gentle gratitude for life. For me, it was a blueprint for justice. for war, and I was done waiting to feel better before acting. He gambled that I'd die quietly, but I lived, loudly, and now I wanted him to know exactly what that meant. It started with a folder buried under my bed, a dusty plastic file bin marked taxes and boring stuff that I hadn't touched since before the diagnosis. I was looking for my old W-2S when I found the LLC papers, neatly clipped together, still bearing both our names in thick black ink. Emery Lynn, managing partner. Grant Weaver, managing partner. Equal shares. The business itself had been Grant's brainchild, a freelance marketing firm we started when we were broke and ambitious and thought we'd be in love forever. I'd designed the website, run the books, sent invoices, even pulled all-nighters over coffee and cold pizza to help him land his first client. When things got serious, he gradually pushed me out of the picture, claiming he'd take care of everything while I worked a full-time job to pay our rent. I thought he'd officially closed it or bought me out in some subtle betrayal I'd never noticed. But no. Legally, I was still tied to it. My name hadn't just been forgotten, it had been ignored. Sloppy. Arrogant. Classic Grant. I logged into the state's business portal and, to my shock, the admin credentials still worked. No password reset, no revoked access. His digital fingerprints were everywhere. Client rosters, billing schedules, even an active PayPal account linked to a personal bank. And mine were still stamped into the bones of the thing. It was like opening a forgotten room in a house we once owned together and finding out he'd never changed the locks. I sat there, cross-legged on the carpet, holding that binder like it was a live wire. He didn't just abandon me, he forgot to clean up after his own selfishness. The business wasn't thriving, but it was functional. And more importantly, I still had say. I could see payments going through. Clients with contracts. And no one had been notified that the company was, in essence, under dual control. The realization didn't bring joy. It brought something cleaner. Leverage. All those nights, I wept over bills while he slept soundly in some other woman's bed. Smug and free, I now held a key to a room he didn't even remember existed. I didn't scream. I didn't send a text or post a passive-aggressive quote on Instagram. I opened a new document. I started drafting a formal letter, a record. I wasn't going to make noise, I was going to make paperwork. And in a world that respects signatures more than sob stories, that was how I'd start to tilt the scales. He left behind more than memories. He left behind power, and I'd learned how to use it. I didn't mean to spiral down the rabbit hole, but it was late and quiet, and insomnia had its claws in me again. So I searched his name just once, just to see. Grant Weaver, marketing consultant, brand strategist, dripping in faux professionalism on LinkedIn and Instagram, like he'd reinvented himself into someone wise and self-made. His profile photo was recent smiling against some beachy backdrop, tanned, carefree, not a single trace of what he'd walked away from. His bio mentioned the business by name. Our business still running under the LLC, we started in our cramped kitchen with a whiteboard and wild hope. Only now, he was self-employed, racking up reviews from clueless clients who called him reliable and dedicated. I almost laughed. There was something about watching a liar play dress-up in his own delusions that made my stomach turn and my pulse go still. Then I found the breadcrumbs the insurance company tagged in a story, the caption on a photo where he joked about finally having good coverage now that I'm the boss. That's when it clicked. He was insuring himself through the LLC, health, dental, probably even a cushy HSA. The same man who watched me vomit in a bucket after chemo, who ghosted with a note and a vanishing act, had used the structure we built to make himself legally bulletproof. Meanwhile, I'd begged for financial aid from the hospital billing office while wearing a beanie to hide the hair that had fallen out in clumps. The gall of it, the audacity. And yet, somewhere beneath the rage, a strange calm took root. Because suddenly, I saw the full picture. He hadn't just moved on, he'd tethered his new life to the bones of our old one. The very system that had left me broken was now the one he leaned on like a crutch. And I still had a grip on it. I stared at his logo, our logo, slightly tweaked but unmistakably mine too, and I thought this isn't over. This is an unfinished chapter. I didn't want him to suffer the way I had. That would be too simple. I wanted accountability, traceable, and clinical. I wanted him to open his mailbox one day and find a letter that made him feel what I had. Small, out of control, and suddenly very aware of the cost of selfishness. I wasn't after vengeance. I was after correction, and I had just found my first lever. I didn't shout it from the rooftops. I didn't call my sister or post vague quotes about karma online. I made tea, opened my laptop, and began the most satisfying administrative work of my life. With every quiet keystroke, I re-entered the ecosystem we had once built together, a system Grant had assumed I'd abandoned just because he had. The LLC was still active, but its foundation hadn't been updated in years, and according to state records, I still held 50%. He hadn't bothered to amend anything. That told me everything about his arrogance, and everything about my opportunity. I contacted a lawyer, someone my therapist's husband recommended, a woman named Layla, who spoke in calm, decisive sentences, like someone who'd seen this kind of slow-burn revenge 100 times before. "You're not touching his money," she reminded me more than once. "You're asserting your ownership. That's different." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. That distinction mattered to me too. I wasn't coming for blood. I was coming for structure, for boundaries, and the dignity he had once made me feel I didn't deserve. The LLC was restructured over the course of 3 quiet weeks. Nothing flashy. No alarms. I didn't lock him out. I didn't even change the name. I simply added layers, new board rules, a co-signatory clause, a notification system for any major financial activity. Layla filed the paperwork with surgical precision. It was like installing glass walls in a house he thought was still his alone. Now, every dollar that passed through would ping me. Every client contract would technically require my signature. Every time he tried to leverage it for another benefit, another insurance renewal, another loan, another tax filing, I would appear like an unexpected reflection. I didn't want to cripple him. I wanted him aware. Every move he made would now come with a whisper of my name. The way my recovery had been haunted by his absence, his business would now be haunted by my presence, not angrily, not even maliciously, but deliberately. It was the first time since chemo I felt genuinely powerful, not vindictive, not unstable, just seen. Every legal adjustment came with a paper trail, a timestamp, a receipt. It was the kind of revenge you could present in a courtroom if needed, or simply file away and smile about over tea. I had made my move, and I had done it without breaking a single rule. The silence felt like thunder. The email came at 3:12 a.m., a cold, automated notice that the policy tied to his business account had been flagged for structural discrepancies and placed under review. I wasn't awake to see it, but I imagined him reading it under the glow of his phone screen, face tightening, eyes darting between terms he didn't understand. He wouldn't connect the dots, not yet. Men like Grant don't assume the woman they left bald and vomiting in a clinic chair is capable of ruining their comfort with a single signature. But that's what made it beautiful. The cancellation was procedural, nothing dramatic, just a series of clauses tripped by the newly implemented ownership requirements. He couldn't legally verify sole control anymore. And without sole control, the insurance company froze the policy. Simple math, really. By the time he sat down with his accountant, who looked as confused as he did, their questions would bounce into legal gray zones. My name, floating like a ghost in documents, he thought he'd buried. I never touched his funds, never sent a warning, never gloated. I just existed again legally, where he tried to erase me, and it drove him quietly mad. Social media became my secret stage. He didn't know I still followed him through a burner account. I watched as the curated photos of latte meetings and co-working retreats gave way to cryptic captions and sudden rants about bureaucracy strangling small business owners. A week later, he posted a story, white background, black text, all caps, "Insurance companies are a scam." I smiled. He was unraveling. I could tell by the way he started tagging irrelevant influencers, grasping for a digital echo chamber to validate him. But this wasn't about validation. It was about consequence. And the irony that the man who once told me I was too emotional to handle serious things was now panicking over policy terms he couldn't untangle it. Tasted better than any revenge fantasy I'd ever entertained during treatment. He had no clue I was behind it. Not yet. That was the mercy in it, the silence before the thunderclap. Every call he made to the insurance company redirected him to a generic voicemail. Every attempt to rewrite the terms hit a wall he couldn't name. That wall was me. Me, with hair growing back, a pulse steadier than ever, sipping mint tea while his world flickered. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to post. I had become the paper trail he ignored, the signature he thought didn't matter. And now, the man who walked out on cancer couldn't even protect his own health. Tell me that isn't poetry. The message from my attorney came on a quiet Tuesday morning, sandwiched between a pharmacy refill alert and a reminder for my 6-month oncology scan. The subject line was sterile, claim disruption update, but the attachment held the kind of quiet justice you don't frame on a wall, just fold up and carry in your back pocket like a lucky charm. Apparently, Grant had taken a weekend hike with his new girlfriend's friends, some startup wellness group obsessed with cold plunges and bouldering, and decided he was still 25 and invincible. One fall later, he was driven to an urgent care clinic with a torn ligament in his shoulder and a wrist that looked like it had been twisted by karma itself. He handed them his insurance card with that same smug confidence he used to have whenever a waiter brought him the bill, like he had already calculated how the world would work in his favor. But systems don't forget like people do. His coverage, already flagged, was fully void. The receptionist handed him a clipboard of out-of-pocket forms and asked if he'd like to pay up front or apply for medical credit. I imagined him standing there in those overpriced joggers, blinking like he'd just been slapped with a language he didn't speak. No one came to save him, not the woman he left me for. Not the clients whose invoices he hadn't paid. He was just another uninsured man with a sprained ego and a very expensive afternoon. The legal notice came through the LLC's registered address, still half mine because the clinic was seeking reimbursement, and their billing department had every right to contact all business owners on file. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Just seeing his name attached to phrases like payment overdue and no response from policyholder was enough. I stared at the document until the printer hummed to life, then folded it into a small square and tucked it into my journal, where months earlier I'd written, "Don't forget how he left." This was the echo of that exit, only now he was the one in pain, scrambling for footing, and no one was coming to the rescue. Somewhere in the distance, a billing cycle ticked over, and I poured myself another cup of tea. The same man who abandoned me in a hospital chair now couldn't even get into one. It wasn't revenge. It was rhythm. And for the first time in a long time, the beat was mine. It came as a message request. Not even bold enough to use the number he once texted from during those sleepless nights when chemo had me shivering and he'd say, "You're stronger than this." Like he wasn't the one who'd eventually vanish mid-battle. No, this one slid into the inbox I hadn't checked in weeks, buried under promotional emails and chain letters from cousins I hadn't spoken to since high school. His name looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown. I opened it out of curiosity, not weakness, and immediately regretted eating while I read. It started with, "Hey," like we were old friends bumping into each other at the farmer's market. Then came the landmine. "I've been thinking a lot about us," as if us still existed anywhere outside the wreckage he left. He rambled about how he's had a rough few months, how he lost a couple clients, how some insurance mix-up screwed him over, and now he's in debt and dealing with physical therapy. He called it karma, but dressed it in self-pity, not accountability. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, like the act of walking out mid-chemo was something that just happened to me, not something he did. "I was scared," he added, as if fear was a passport to cruelty. Then came the kicker. "Maybe we could talk?" No reason, no clear goal. Just that vague, cowardly invitation to let him off the hook if I still had any thread of compassion left. And the most pathetic part? He ended it with, "Hope you're doing okay. You look great in your new photos." My jaw clenched. I remembered those nights in my sister's guest room, bloated from steroids and burning from radiation, crying into a pillow because he wouldn't even answer the phone. I remembered the moment I threw up blood in a Whole Foods parking lot because I didn't have gas money to get all the way home. And I remembered who wasn't there to pick me up, so I didn't reply. I didn't block him either. Let him sit with the echo. Let him watch the seen notification blink, like a heartbeat proof that I was alive, aware, and absolutely uninterested. I poured a glass of wine, opened a new page in my journal, and wrote one word across the top in big, bold ink. Number. Because sometimes, silence isn't the absence of forgiveness, it's the final, unshakable verdict. I said yes, not because I missed him, or needed him to grovel, or even wanted answers, but because curiosity wears many disguises, and mine looked like closure. We met at a quiet cafe near the courthouse, a place filled with glass windows and second chances baked into scones. He arrived 10 minutes late, of course, some habits being harder to unlearn than others, and when he saw me, really saw me, I watched something flicker behind his eyes, a stutter in his memory. As if he'd expected the same hollowed-out version of me he left behind, bald, broken, bent beneath IV poles. But the woman who stood to greet him had grown her hair back, shoulder-length and defiant, had eyeliner sharp enough to cut through excuses, and a posture that said, without words, "You're not my undoing anymore." He said my name like a question, soft, almost reverent, and I answered it with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He ordered coffee, the same pretentious roast he always liked, and tried to fill the silence with small talk, but I let it stretch. I wanted him to feel every inch of it. Finally, he began halting, unsure, fumbling his way through an apology like someone reading lines they didn't write. He said he panicked, said he wasn't strong enough, said he hated himself for leaving. I nodded, not out of forgiveness, but because it wasn't news. I'd already screamed those things into my pillow months ago. I listened, not to let him off the hook, but to make sure he didn't get to rewrite the story. When he asked how I was doing now, I told him the truth that I was alive, healthier than ever, and that peace, unlike panic, doesn't leave in the middle of the night. He looked like he wanted to say something more, maybe ask if there was still a place for him somewhere in my orbit, but I stood before he could. I left a 10 on the table, not because I owed him coffee, but because I owed myself the dignity of walking away on my own terms. As I pushed open the cafe door, sunlight hit my face like applause, and I didn't look back. Closure isn't always a grand speech or a slammed door. Sometimes it's a calm exit, hair tucked behind your ear, shoes clicking with quiet certainty, and a man left holding an empty cup in the wake of the woman he once mistook for weak. The letter came in a bland envelope. Ironic, given how final it would feel once opened, and, though I wasn't there to see his face crumple, I imagined every crease. The kind of letter that doesn't waste ink on comfort. Just a single cold paragraph stating that his insurance plan was permanently invalid, and his coverage could not be reinstated under the current business structure. Because the LLC, the one he had flaunted as his ticket to independence, his clean break from our shared past no longer legally existed. I had filed the dissolution paperwork weeks ago, carefully, quietly, with the same steady hands that once trembled signing hospital consent forms. This time, the consent was mine, and the consequence his. No loopholes, no reinstatement. Just a polite, legal wall that shut him out entirely. His name no longer sat next to mine on any state document. It floated, anchorless, in the system, a liability with no protections. I could imagine him scanning the words again and again, as if disbelief might morph them into a different outcome. And then the slow, rising realization that everything he built on my back, every invoice, every gig that funneled through that LLC, every premium he lazily assumed would auto-renew, was now reduced to nothing more than a canceled file in a government archive. He'd have to start over, apply again, declare pre-existing conditions, pay out of pocket for the MRI he probably needed after that weekend injury. And none of it would be subsidized by the woman he abandoned when she couldn't walk from the chemo chair to the bathroom without help. I didn't need to be cruel. I just needed to be thorough. I didn't take his money, didn't drain his account, didn't make a scene. I simply made sure the paper trail led nowhere. This wasn't revenge with fireworks. It was a quiet fireproofing of my future, and if the blaze caught up with him, well, maybe next time, he wouldn't strike the match. I didn't celebrate when the legal notification hit my inbox. I just exhaled, a soft, steady breath, the kind of breath I hadn't taken since he left. And when I closed my laptop and sipped my tea, I felt no guilt, no doubt, no flicker of the old self who begged to be loved through illness. That version of me had been buried and reborn in every waiting room, every treatment cycle, Every silent night I survived without him. This version? She rewrites endings and files her own paperwork. Healing didn't look the way I thought it would. It wasn't fireworks or some dramatic turning point. It was quiet, deliberate, and deeply human. I found myself in a circle of folding chairs on a Tuesday night, sitting beside people who had also stared at ceilings with IVs in their arms and wondered if their bodies would ever feel like home again. The cancer survivor group was small, but the laughter was big, and it was the first place I didn't feel the need to perform strength or shrink my story. I spoke in full sentences. I didn't downplay. I didn't flinch. I said things out loud that used to live only in my journal, and when I looked around, no one looked away. Over time, I became someone people sought out after meetings me. The same woman who once sobbed in the bathroom trying to peel off tape from a bandage too stuck to skin too thin. I became a mentor without even realizing it. People asked how I kept going, and I told them the truth. Some days I didn't, but I got up anyway. That was enough. Meanwhile, my work picked up like it had been waiting for me to come back. Projects flowed, clients returned, and the part of my brain that used to hold scans and side effects began filling with design briefs and creative drafts. I kept a soft playlist on loop and lit a candle in the mornings, not for the scent, but for the ritual, the reminder that my time now belonged to me. I cleaned out drawers. I donated old scarves. I bought a new set of mugs with tiny imperfections in the glaze because they reminded me that survival isn't always smooth, it's chipped and beautiful. And then came the day when a friend introduced me to someone no expectations, just coffee, and I said yes. Not because I needed distraction or affirmation, but because I was curious about what it would feel like to sit across from someone and not apologize for the scars. We talked for hours. I told him everything, including the ugly parts, and he didn't flinch either. That night, I walked home under a lavender sky, not giddy, but grounded. It wasn't a new love story, it was just a new chapter, one where I finally knew who I was without needing someone else to tell me. Health, it turns out, isn't just physical, it's the weightlessness that comes from not hiding anymore. It started as a whisper in a group chat I hadn't checked in weeks. A screenshot, his name in bold, followed by a caption that felt like something out of satire. Help Grant get back on his feet. I clicked. Of course. Curiosity is a kind of gravity, and this pulled hard. The crowdfunding page had all the makings of pity bait. A somber black and white photo of him looking off into the distance, paragraphs filled with vague allusions to a devastating insurance loss, unexpected injury, and being left in the cold by a former business partner. There were no names, of course. Cowards never use names when they still hope to look noble. But the best part wasn't the story he told, it was the story the internet told back. The comments didn't just question him, they dragged him. Someone had posted a link to a Reddit thread titled, "My fiancé left me mid-cancer and took the savings, ask me anything." I recognized the language. It was mine. My post. Months ago, I'd written it anonymously, more to exercise the ache than to seek justice, and now it had resurfaced like a ghost with a grudge. The replies under the thread were brutal and brilliant people connecting the dots, matching LLC records, confirming his freelancing timeline, exposing the insurance scam for what it was. A few donations trickled into his campaign, but most were sarcastic. Here's $5 for your soul, since you clearly sold it already. I wasn't behind it. I hadn't shared the thread. I hadn't sent a single message. But watching it unfold felt like standing at the edge of a storm I didn't need to dance in. I'd already walked through the rain. A part of me wondered if he scrolled through those comments late at night, eyes bloodshot, pride crumbling, recognizing pieces of the woman he discarded in the sentences now cutting him down. I wondered if he ever thought about how silence has teeth, how sometimes the best revenge isn't loud, it's enduring. I closed the page eventually. I didn't donate. I didn't gloat. I just sat there with my tea and my scar and my peace, and let the wind carry whatever part of his dignity was left into the void he made for himself. It was never about ruining him. It was about letting the truth breathe. And now, apparently, the internet was doing the rest. I didn't post the thread. That much I know with absolute clarity. It wasn't my fingers that typed those words, though every line echoed the ache I once carried. Someone out there had found the pieces and laid them bare, like turning a sweater inside out to reveal the frayed seams someone hoped no one would notice. And while I'll never know who stitched the timeline together or connected the LLC to the man limping through sympathy posts, I do know this. I didn't have to set the fire. All I had to do was stop shielding him from the smoke. People talk about karma like it's some ethereal force, whispers of consequence floating through the universe. But sometimes, karma isn't magic. Sometimes, it's paperwork. It's receipts. It's me, sitting on a secondhand couch in my one-bedroom apartment, feet tucked under a blanket my sister crocheted during my second round of chemo, sipping mint tea and watching the light shift across the hardwood floor. No courtroom, no public scene, just a quiet kind of reckoning. Grant isn't ruined. He's still walking around, still posting filtered gym selfies and half-truths in captions, still trying to rebuild the pedestal he once stood on. But the ground beneath him is softer now, uncertain. Because I'm not beneath him anymore, holding it up. And that's the difference. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't some grand vendetta carried out with dramatic flair and shouting matches. It was a series of decisions made in private. Boundaries drawn like chalk outlines around what I would no longer carry. And while he scrambles to reclaim the narrative, I no longer feel the need to defend mine. My story doesn't need an audience to be valid. My healing didn't require applause. And yet, when the comments rolled in and strangers saw through the mask he wore, I won't lie, I smiled. Not because he suffered, but because the truth floated to the surface on its own, like oil on water. For once, I didn't twist myself into silence to protect someone who wouldn't have done the same for me. For once, I let the chips fall, let the consequences catch up. And that evening, as I curled up in my robe, face clean, inbox empty, a sense of stillness settled deep in my chest. I didn't destroy him. I just stopped protecting him. And that, in the end, was enough.